One of the hearings they have in the subcommittee on juvenile delinquency is on comic books. And the center of that hearing is a guy named Frederick Wortham. Have you heard of Frederick Wortham?
Not a single time.
Okay. So massive caveat. Okay. Frederick Wortham is very obviously a guy trying to do the right thing, right? The dude worked as a child psychologist for pretty much his whole life, largely serving underprivileged kids in New York City. Yeah. So not for free, but basically for free. Like kids and families could come and get therapy for like 5 cents, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's great. Even for the cost at that time. Because like a comic book was 10 cents, right?
Yeah. So it's basically nothing, right?
Yeah.
He ran a clinic called the La Ferru. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's French. Clinic with a bunch of other child psychologists, right? And he's trying to help them. Mm-hmm. And he was working with all genders and all races, right? At a time when that was not common. His takes in his book, Seduction of the Innocent, which you might have heard of, about racism and sexism are like pretty on point. Like, there's plenty of stuff that's outdated. Don't get me wrong, but like he's got good attitudes, right? About like, can we get along and like treat each other like humans and like, you know, what does this teach? Like when he's getting mad about comic books, he's also getting mad about like, what is it teaching us about gender? What is it teaching us about, you know, race, right?
I mean, all fair points, because as we've read the Golden Age, there's been a lot of times where we're like, oh my God, I can't believe this was okay. Yeah.
And not in a way, and I know like race and gender like today are like hot button issues in like dumb ways. This is in ways that would have been like totally obvious to everyone.
Well, that's good.
Yes, it is good.
I mean, because I was kind of starting to wonder, he's a psychologist, child psychologist in like the 40s and 50s.
Yes.
What was the psychology that he was
not
teaching?
Great.
And, you know, that's
not great.
It's all based on Freud, or is there like more modern?
A lot of Freud stuff.
Yeah. So that's part of where my head's at too. Is like,
don't get me wrong. I'm almost done with the section of caveating.
Okay.
But he's not. You know. He wrote on a lot of other topics besides comic books. In fact, some of his books were cited in Brown v. Board of Education, which is which integrated schools across races. So did a lot of really good and important work, and he was trying to do the right thing. I think probably trying to be a good guy, right?
Sure.
But because he's the figurehead of this movement, he's the punching bag.
Sure.
In most people's eyes, Wortham is the reason that comic books were censored.
Mm.
Everyone hates him. Even modern scholars, like people who are writing books, are really hesitant to talk about him in a negative light because they think that people who are uneducated, right, like people like us, like fans coming in, are going to like misunderstand him. And he's a complicated guy, and it is easy to misunderstand. So that's all the caveating out of the way. We're going to hit on the rest of the episode. That's just the reality. Yeah. He wrote this book called Seduction of the Innocent. I have a copy here. These are online. Don't buy these. Okay. These ones with the gold foil and the hardbacks that are really nice, the new printings. His family is basically engineered artificial scarcity of the original book. Like they buy up copies and take them off the market. And then they do these fancy printings with gold foil and charge like hundreds of dollars for them. Don't buy this book. Pirate it. It's very easy to find online. There's no reason to pay people. This guy's dead, long dead. The book is not. Yeah.
So what's your hot take on the Disney Vault then?
My hot take on the Disney Vault was I tend to abhor artificial scarcity. Like the idea that like you shouldn't pirate a video game and we're not going to sell it to you is pretty dumb. Mm-hmm. So yeah, go find a copy of this book free online if you want to read it. Which by the way, I don't recommend. I've read like, I don't know, 2/3 of it, half to 2/3 of it. His take is that comics are bad, right? So, and he starts from that premise, right? Comics are obviously ruining kids' brains, right? He doesn't even really try to convince you at first, right? The analogy he uses is that of a gardener. When you're a gardener and the plant like withers and dies, you don't blame the plants, right? You blame the gardener, right? So his idea is that like we're responsible for the kids. And like we have to take care of them. We have to water them. We have to make sure they get sunlight, right? Mm-hmm. And like there are ways in which that argument I'm sympathetic to. Like the idea that like you are what you eat, right? Like you will become what you're taking in, and therefore like you should care as a parent about what your kid is taking in, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sympathetic to that, but the way he says it is really really interesting. So here's one of the passages from the first 20 pages of the book. Some time ago, a judge found himself confronted with 12 youths, the catch of some 150 policemen assigned to prevent a street battle of juvenile gangs. This outbreak was a sequel to the killing of a 15-year-old boy who had been stabbed to death as he sat with his girl in a parked car. The 12 boys were charged with being involved in the shooting of 3 boys with a 22 caliber zip gun and a 32 caliber revolver. The indignant judge addressed them angrily. We're not treating you like kids any longer. If you act like hoodlums, you'll be treated like hoodlums. But were these youths treated like kids in the first place? Were they protected against the corrupting influence of comic books, which glamorize and advertise dangerous knives and guns that can be converted into deadly weapons? That's one of the first times he says the words comic books in the whole book, right?
Wow.
It's matter of fact. He says, were they protected from the corrupting influence of comic books? In the first time he tells you about comic books, he's not trying to convince you. He's just telling you they're bad, right? That's his take. Throughout the book, he kind of jumps around, right? Like he sort of flits from example to example to example. It's not really organized per se. I mean, there are chapters that are about different things, but like he will indulge himself in like telling a story that like is to talk about how comics are bad or like paint them all with the same brush, right? And he has lots of like sort of tropes that drive me crazy. So like one of the things that he does really frequently is he'll conflate depiction with instruction. Right. This kind of overlaps with what you were talking about, like teaching kids how to pick locks. That was the thing you were saying earlier, right? Yeah. He will say that because something happens in a book, right, that they're teaching the kid how to do it. So here's a quote from a passage. So we carefully followed developments. In a crime comic that came out after the code had been in existence for some time, a representative specimen of this group shows killing a policeman knocked out with a usual smart, contemptuous wisecrack. I can't stick around to explain, copper. A man shot in the stomach. A woman mugged and then killed with a hammer to get her pocketbook. Blood. The up-to-date ending of one murder story. Archie Frizz didn't die in the electric chair. The state psychiatrist found him to be insane. Detailed instructions about how to hold up a big grocery store and brutal murder story with the murderer not even caught by law, but dying in an accident, right? So, yes. So he says, like, detailed instruction on how to hold up a big grocery store. I can tell you with a certifiable fact, there was no 1950s comic book that told you how to rob a grocery store, right?
Yeah.
He does this thing where, because they show it, it's teaching you how to do it. To study the psychological effects of comics in children, one must have more than a superficial and scantily knowledge of what is in them. For in the children's nightmares, or in their play, or in their productions and psychological tests, any association or reference occurs to Venusians or Voltman, to a synthoshade, or to the precise instructions on how to case wealthy homes. For burglaries, you will not understand their response if you do not know the stimulus. So that's kind of a complicated way of saying, right? Like, okay, Venusians, which are like imaginary people from Venus, or Voltman, which are like imaginary, cyborgs, right? Or synthoshades, right? Like these things that you don't understand, right? Like if you're a parent, you have no clue what that is. How could you possibly understand how it's influencing their play, right? And he lumps those things in with precise instructions on how to case wealthy homes.
So interesting. It's really bizarre too. Cause like specifically the how to case wealthy homes. Like I remember in, I don't know, late 90s, early thousands, there was like a show maybe on the Discovery Channel or something like that. And it was about these two guys who were like successful, but like reformed like burglars. That like talked in detail about how to break into houses and like how quickly it works and like which houses are at risk because of where they're located on the street and like what the view is from the road and all this stuff. And it was all in this idea of like teaching you how to secure your house against this kind of stuff. But like mostly it was just like really fascinating to see how like criminals worked.
Sure.
And that is instruction, I guess.
Sure. Well, and the thing is that like, it's not even that, right? Like, so you're right. There's the lockpicking lawyer on YouTube today. Yeah. And you could argue that he's showing you how to pick a lock, right? He is instructing you how to do it. This is not that, right? Like, if you've ever read a Golden Age comic book, you understand that this is 8 pages, right? Where in a minute here, we're going to talk about a comic book that I made you read. Would you say that anything you saw in that was instruction on how to commit a crime?
No.
Right.
It's like there is a really vast, because to me, it sounds like this guy has like very little imagination and is willing to like make some big logical leaps to be able to say like, okay, I read this thing about how evil a person could be, and therefore I can be in the mind of a very evil person. And it's like the comic you had me read was about H.H. Holmes, the like first American serial killer.
Yes.
And like it just kind of described in some very broad strokes how he set up his system. But like there was no schematic, there was no like description of like how he went from here to there, or like how he like it's just that there have to be some like really big logical leaps to say like, yeah, therefore I could do it based on this like really low quality instruction. Right, if we're calling it instruction, right?
Yes.
So like that, it's just really wild.
Yes. Well, it's like saying I saw the opening scene in The Dark Knight where the Joker holds up a bank, and therefore I know how to hold up a bank. Like that was a recipe on how to hold up a bank. It is nothing of the sort, right? Like it is showing something happening. It's not the same as telling you how to do it.
Yeah, it's like this looks easy, therefore it is easy.
Right.
Which is not ever the case.
he has other tropes, right? Beyond the conflation with depiction and instruction. He paints with a broad brush. So one of the things that he hammers on over and over and over and over is the idea of quote unquote crime comics, right? And I think this is designed as a deflection of one of the sort of like primary problems that people have with him, which is that like, actually, yeah, there are some comic books that were doing some pretty crazy stuff in the 1950s. They were violent. They were bloody. They were a lot, right? And little kids probably shouldn't be reading them. And so, people would come to him and say like, what about like Mickey Mouse? What about Donald Duck? Because those were hugely popular at the time. What about, animal comics apparently were a thing. There's jungle comics were really popular. Western comics were really popular, right? And he says his sort of answer to them is that like, those are crime comics too. Yes. So, quote, for example, a 10-year-old girl from a cultivated and literate home asked me why I thought it was harmful to read Wonder Woman, a crime comic, which we have found to be one of the most harmful. She saw in her home many good books, and I look at that as the starting point, explaining to her what good stories and novels were. I told her, suppose you get used to eating sandwiches made with very strong seasonings, with onions and peppers and highly spiced mustard. You will lose your taste for simple bread and butter and for finer food. The same is true of reading strong comic books. If later on you want to read a good novel, it may describe how a young boy and girl sit together and watch the rain falling. They talk about themselves, and the pages of the book describe what their innermost thoughts are. That is what it is called literature. You will never be able to appreciate that if, in comic book fashion, you expect that any minute someone will appear and pitch both of them out the window. In this case, the girl understood and the advice worked, right? So there's numerous examples of that where he says like, well, Batman and Robin, they're stopping people who do crimes. So it is a crime comic book, right?
Yeah.
In Wonder Woman, there are people who do crime. So it is a crime comic book. In, an issue of like Donald Duck, I picked up, like there was someone who, jaywalked. Yeah. And so it's a crime comic. And in the Jungle Books, there was violence. And so it's a crime comic book, right? So like he does this like equivalence thing where he spends all of his time talking about how crime comic books are bad. But if you ask about anything else, those are also crime comic books.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like I'm listening to this description. I'm thinking like, what did he think about nursery rhymes?
Right. Well, that's actually something that comes up a lot, right? As parents and teachers and librarians, right, are pushing on all these ways that comic books aren't as good as classics, there are groups of people who try to make comic books sort of higher brow, right? So there were Bible adaptations, right, that were put into comics. There were adaptations of the classics that were put into comic adaptations, right?
Well, those are definitely crime comics.
Well, that's basically what he says, right? He's like, well, if you have something like, A Tale of Two Cities, there's a lot of violence in that. And when you distill it down to a comic book, that's all that's left, right? Like you don't get the nuance anymore, right? If you in Hamlet, they kill people, right? And so, if you're reading a comic of Hamlet and you just look at the pictures, it's the same as a crime comic book, right? And he's like, you're taking all of the stuff that was good about the classic and you're removing it. It's his sort of argument, right? Those are crime comic books too.
Wow.
Yeah. Another thing that he does is he will gerrymander newspaper comic books or newspaper comics out of the sort of stack of bad things and comic books in, right? Right? Because he knows parents read comic strips. Like everyone gets the newspaper. Like the president, we talked about it, is reading Dick Tracy. Everyone's super into newspaper strips, right?
Yeah.
Quote, our study concerned itself with comic books and not with newspaper comic strips. There are fundamental differences between the two, which the comic book industry does its best to cloud. Comic strips appear mainly in newspapers and Sunday supplements of newspapers. Comic books are separate entities, always with colored pictures and a glaring cover. They are called books by children, pamphlets by the printing industry, magazines by the post office, which accords them second-class mailing privileges. Comic books are most widely read by children, comic strips by adults. There is, of course, an overlap, but the distinction is a valid and important one. Newspaper comic strips function under a severe censorship exercised by some 1,500 newspaper editors of the country who sometimes reject details or even whole sequences of comic strips. For comic books, there exists no such censorship by an outside agency which has the authority to reject. When comic strips are reprinted as comic books, the censorship that existed before, where they were intended for adults, disappears, and the publisher enjoys complete license. He can, and sometimes does, add a semi-pornographic story for the children, for example, and a gory cover, things from which censorship protects the adult comic strip reader.
That was a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Especially at the end there.
they add the semi-pornographic story for the children. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like hot, like big, bold claims, right?
Yeah.
He often makes sort of like strident, bold statements without like examples to back it up. Another thing that he does, right, is he quotes children a lot, right? So he does have tons and tons and tons of experience.
This is dangerous, actually.
Yeah. Working directly with children as a child psychologist. Mm-hmm. And he there's huge swaths of the book where he's talking about what they said about comic books, right? Supposedly. And all of it reads like, r/that happened, right? Like it's all like my cousin works for Nintendo. I've got a girlfriend in Canada. It's all like very, very dubious. And I took a couple examples that I wanted to share with you. When asked a 10-year-old child who reads 10 comic books a week, what are your thoughts about comics? I like murder comics. Another 12-year-old child. I like gangbusters. Crime does not pay. Batman and Superman. They do murders, like shooting. The girls do things to the men. Catch bad men and take them to the law. Bullets bounce off girls and Supergirl. She can fly and swing on ropes. In murder books, men steal and throw the cop off the roof and kill about 5 men. Some make you scared at night. You dream about it and think somebody's going to kill you. Some tells about stealing, killing people. Some stick with knives, shoot with guns, beat them over their heads with sticks and stick them in the eyes. Hit them over the head with a poker and string them up with ropes. I can read them now because I know what's right and wrong. My aunt teaches me not to do bad things.
These are crazy.
I like Superman. A man be laying down in bed and the door be locked and the lady run outside for help and hollers. The man comes from the window. Girls are always getting hurt in comic books. Every time the girl goes with a man, there's a murder and the girl screams. And these are the complete quotes. Like, you can imagine you're asking like a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, an 8-year-old, what do you think about comics, right? Do you think they're saying like 3 sentences?
No.
Do you think they're saying more?
Oh, I'm certain they're saying more.
And do you lead with, I like murder comics?
No. That was a complete quote. Like that was
that is one of the quotes he provided.
It's just
I like murder comics. Yes.
Yeah, these are. I want to know how old these kids are too, because
they range. They range from like 6 to like 14 to 16. Yeah.
Yeah, some of those read as like very young.
Right. So I can tell you that just from my instinct, a lot of these things strained credulity. When I'm reading it, I'm like, did they say that? Is that all they said? Is this?
Well, it also strikes me as like cherry picking.
Yes, 100%. Yes. That's how I felt about it too.
Okay, because like I remember going to like, say, church camp.
Yes.
100 kids. I'd say like 98 of them they were great. And I remember like 1 or 2 kids that I thought like, your parents are letting you watch whatever you feel like, and you're saying things you're not supposed to say, and that's like that's a reflection on the parent, in my opinion, not the 100%. Television or whatever.
Yes. And the fact of the matter is that he is working with underprivileged kids, right? These are people who are experiencing violence. These are kids who are experiencing extreme poverty, abuse, right? Are involved in in messed up situations that kids should not be in. I don't think there's anyone who contests that, right?
Yeah.
That being said, even so, a lot of these strain my ability to believe are word for word quotes. We'll come back to that.
Okay.